In this video, I want to provide an introduction to simple eukaryotes, or unicellular organisms that have a nucleus. Now remember that prokaryotes are another type of unicellular organism, and they're actually the most abundant type. There's approximately 2 million different species of prokaryotes. Prokaryotic organisms do not have a nucleus, but they do have DNA. It's just loose in the cytoplasm. And they don't have any organelles other than ribosomes. All of the metabolic processes that have to happen will happen inside prokaryotes, but they are not, those processes are not connected to a particular organelle. We have two domains, the bacteria and the archaebacteria, found in our prokaryotes, and they are very small cells that really are found everywhere in a whole variety of environments, including inside human beings. Our eukaryotes are all other organisms, and these cells have a nucleus. The more traditional idea of a cell is a eukaryotic organism. They also have many different organelles where those processes that are needed to keep life happening can happen in those organelles. They can be contained there. There's only one domain, the eukarya, but there are many kingdoms under that. We're going to look just at two kingdoms today, Protista and Fungi, because this is where we're going to find our unicellular organisms. Instead of 2 million different species, we only have about 200,000 species of the protists and only about 1,500 species of the unicellular fungi, which are known as yeasts. So even though there are many more species in the protists, we're probably more familiar with some of these things that are eukaryotes. So let's talk about Protista. This kingdom of organisms, they are found in water or other moist environments, and most are unicellular, just single-celled organisms. There are some that are multicellular. I have a picture over here of a piece of kelp, which can be as tall as a tree, and even though it looks sort of like a plant, it's not. It's a type of algae, and it fits in the Protista kingdom. Protists can be autotrophs. They can make their own food using energy from sunlight through photosynthesis. They can be heterotrophs, where they need to take in other organisms for their food source, or they can be something called mixotrophs, which actually can do both autotrophic and heterotrophic processes to get the energy that they need. Protists share some characteristics with animal, plants, and fungi, but they're not exactly like other animals, plants, or fungi. And some of them actually do cause disease. Malaria, which might be a disease you've heard of, is actually caused by a protist, not a bacteria or a virus, but a unicellular eukaryotic organism in the protist kingdom. Giardia is another perhaps familiar protist-caused disease, and many of plant blight or powdery mildew, other plant diseases that gardeners have to worry about, are actually caused by protists. Protists that have animal-like characteristics are also called protozoa or zooplankton, and they are found in our fresh and marine water ecosystems. They're heterotrophs like other animals. They can't make their own food through photosynthesis, and most of the animal-like protists can move through the environment in a variety of ways. Some are also pathogens, but we're going to cause disease. So protozoans move in three basic ways. They may make pseudopods or false feet, cilia that beat kind of like a rowing machine, or flagella, which are sort of a long tail. Amoebas are the prime example of the organism that uses pseudopods. So we can see these pseudopods here being extended out on this amoeba. It's trying to engulf this little creature here and to capture it and eat it for dinner. And they actually, the two pseudopods will close in on each other and make a digestive vacuole in there that will consume that whatever that is that amoeba is eating. Paramecium, this middle picture here, actually have cilia or little fibers that can move back and forth. So all around the outside, there are hundreds of thousands of cilia. You can kind of see a fuzzy outline, but it's very hard to see the cilia under a microscope. And then Giardia, we see there's multiple flagella hanging off this particular organism, and those flagella can move and propel the organism through the water. So the protists that are animal-like are all ones that can move around. In the ecosystem, the protists that are animal-like, or the protozoa, may be predators that hunt down other live creatures. They may be herbivores that are going to be consuming the plant-like protozoa. They are possibly decomposers that help break down decaying matter, other dead organisms, or they can be parasites that are basically using the something from another organism to their own benefit while the other organism is harmed. Protozoa also serve as a food source for many larger organisms, such as other protozoans or even insects and small worms. There are worms that are actually microscopic. And interestingly, several species of protozoa actually have microscopic silica or calcite shells, which are sometimes called tests. And these shells, millions and billions and trillions of them, which are left behind when the organism die, fall to the bottom of the ocean floor, and eventually that sediment becomes the sedimentary rock we know as limestone. So limestone as a rock is actually built on something that was biological, that was made by a living creature, these tiny, tiny microscopic shells of these protist organisms. The plant-like protists go by a more common name of algae or phytoplankton. Like other plants, or like plants, plant-like protists are autotrophs, so that they can do photosynthesis with chloroplasts, and you can see the green color here in some of the pictures I've put in. Some of the plant-like protists are single-celled, so this top one is the euglena, and these very interesting design shapes are diatoms. Other plant-like protists live in colonies, and so they actually band together with other cells to live in a larger structure, but each cell is individual. It's not like a multicellular organism where different cells have different functions, but in these colonies like this Volvox or the Spirogyra, those cells are sticking together to give each other company, and it does provide some benefit to the organism, but the cells do not specialize. And then we have the multicellular algae, which kelp is the prime example. So we have a picture of some kelp. Typically what you think of as seaweed is actually algae. Some of the plant-like protists are able to move. They do have flagella or cilia, because remember, protists are kind of like plants and kind of like animals, but they have their own unique way of doing things. So algae, or phytoplankton, these plant-like protists, are very important because they are producers. They're doing photosynthesis, producing food for themselves and for many, many other organisms. They're a food source for both zooplankton, those animal-like protists, and also larger animals. They are in the marine and freshwater ecosystem. And phytoplankton is where we're getting most of the oxygen in the world's oxygen supply. So oxygen in the air, some of it is coming from plants on land that we see and are familiar with as something that does photosynthesis, but most of the oxygen is coming from these microscopic protists, the algae that's found in the water, in the ocean, in the freshwater of our world. Algae also comes in many colors. It's more than just green, and those various colors of pigments are able to absorb light and power photosynthesis, and that allows the algae to do photosynthesis at different depths in the ocean, because the sunlight, not all the different colors of light can make it very far down into the ocean. As I mentioned already, that seaweed may look like a plant, but it does not have the same internal structure, so it is not a plant. And finally, there's the fungi-like protists, or the fungi-like protists, which are decomposers. Some of these also are pathogens, both for plants and animals. There's two main categories of fungi-like protists. There are the slime molds and the water molds. And slime molds form a colony, so they do look like a multicellular organism, but actually they're just, again, a bunch of single-cell organisms sort of living in the same space. And they move. That's what's interesting about them. They can kind of glide along the forest floor, the moist environment, consuming materials as they go. Water molds are also found in moist environments, actually in the water, can cause certain plant diseases such as powdery mildew or late blight, and also are often seen as parasites on fish. As you can see, this poor fish has got some water mold growing on it and probably causing a great deal of distress to that fish. True fungi are moving now into the other category of eukaryotes. True fungi can be found in many environments, but we find them mostly on land. And really, there's only a few that are unicellular, and we just call them yeast as a general common name for it. again, as I said earlier, about 1,500 different species of yeasts. They are known as, the fungi are heterotrophic saprophytes, so they have to get their own food from something, from eating other organisms, and their choice is to get it from dead and decaying matter. So they're not predators, they don't hunt down their dinner. They are going to take something that's already dead and already starting to break down and continue to break it down so they decompose it more fully. Fungi have cell walls that contain chitin, that's one of the characteristics, and they can reproduce in a variety of ways. You might be familiar with them reproducing by spores if you've ever run into a puffball out in the woods. So we're familiar with these multicellular fungi. Not all fungi look like mushrooms, but we're going to be focusing on these tiny single-cell or unicellular yeasts right now. So yeast are the only type of unicellular fungi. These are how we saw them under the microscope. Just they look like transparent little ovals, and they come in basically an oval shape, though some of them can band together in colonies to make more filament shape. As I said, it's about 1,500 different species of yeast. We find them in the soil, on plant surfaces, and some species like to be in the sugary nectar or fruits of plants. And those ones that feed on sugar are the ones that we have used to produce food, such as bread, beer, and wine. We use the sugars in those foods to provide the food for the yeast. The yeast then does metabolism and produces carbon dioxide, breaks down the sugar, makes our bread rise, puts carbon dioxide into beer and wine, and gives it that fizz that everybody likes. Other species of yeast are somewhere between mildly and dangerously pathogenic to plants and animals, so not all yeast are helpful out of those different species. This example over here is of a condition called thrush, which is a type of yeast infection in the mouth. It's fairly common with young children. It can, of course, happen to anybody at any age, and you can see the white overgrowth of the yeast feeding on the dead skin surface of the tongue, providing irritation. It's not anytime you have something even eating dead skin on you, it's going to be unpleasant, and so this is something that would have to be treated by a doctor. It's not terribly dangerous, but it is rather inconvenient. So just in summary, our unicellular prokaryotic organisms are bacteria and archaebacteria, and our unicellular eukaryotic organisms are protists and fungi. Most protists are unicellular and can share certain characteristics with animals, plants, and fungi, so we often talk about animal-like protists or plant-like protists. The only unicellular fungi that we see are commonly called yeasts, and there are both beneficial and harmful species. Because unicellular species are microscopic, they can easily be overlooked, but they really do play important roles in the biosphere, and they are important organisms to keeping everything working here on Earth.